What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the combined efforts of 20th Century Geek and Stories Out of Time and Space. We're continuing our G.I. Joe retrospective, and as always, I'm here with my comrade in arms, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
Yo, Joe, I'm ready to dive into these the masterpieces that are 3 live-action G.I. Joe movies today.
Yes, we've got to it. G.I. Joe, Rise of Cobra, G.I. Joe Retaliation, and G.I. Joe Snake Eyes. We'll be coming in the next sort of episode. We are starting with Rise of Cobra from 2009, starring Channing Tatum, Marlon Wayans, Dennis Quaid, bloody hell, and Adwell. Why do I always get names I can't pronounce properly? Adwell Akiono.
Because we're white.
Yes, true. I apologise. Incredibly, is really privileged. Christopher Eccleston, Gregory Footy, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, so on and so forth. Sneada Miller, more people. Lee Bong-hoon. I mean, this is quite a big cast.
Eccleston.
Chrissy Eccleston, Rachel Nichols, Jonathan Price, Ray Park. It goes on and on. There's actually quite a few people in this. It's quite a big cast, but let's quickly talk about an elite military unit comprised of special operatives known as G.I. Joe operate out of the pit, takes on an evil organization led by a notorious arms dealer. We'll go through the plot as we get into it. It's easier to just sort of to work through. But generally, nanobots in warheads become a MacGuffin to be chased around the world that can destroy any material. Go.
Well, in fairness, at least it's a little more than a MacGuffin, unlike the Transformers movies. I mean, the nanobots are key to the plot here. But, I mean, they do whatever you need them to do at that moment.
Yes. Yeah, but to be fair, they explain that from the outset. That's not a surprise that comes in later. They are very much like, that's what they can be programmed to do. So at least that's set up early that they are the sort of the rabbit's foot, as the Mission Impossible franchise would call them later on. Yes, but let's just go for it. The initial thoughts of G.I. Joe. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm always amazed by how every time I look back on a movie and I think, maybe my opinion's changed. My opinion has never changed. Every time I'm like, I saw this in theaters, but I was drunk at the time. Like, that's not really fair. I was in a different place in my life. I watch it and I'm like, no, my brain was still my brain. It was functioning the same way. So I remember watching this in theaters and thinking, this is pretty bad. Like I don't know what I think about this. I don't know how to feel about this because there are things that I really like. There are things that I really don't like. And kind of like getting to the end with the undersea battle and thinking like, oh, okay, this is just full over the top sort of, wild James Bond years that we haven't gotten, a lot of movies doing that recently. And I can kind of understand it on that level. But I think it's a very mixed bag. What about you?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned James Bond because that's sort of what came to mind. Actually, I was like, oh, this is a little bit like Roger Moore-esque in some elements of it. Like it gets a little silly, but it's very much of its time. It feels like it's in that sort of franchise chase that I think a lot of studios are after around this time. So we talked briefly off air, but like, this is coming after Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean, Iron Man's just come out. Other studios are looking for like those mega franchises to launch. Before it became the shared universe, it was just the sort of Um, the franchise is what they wanted to launch, and this feels very much in that vein. Um, the weird thing is, having we did GI Joe, Real American Hero, the animated film, then we did the GI Joe other animated film, and they were like chock full of kind of the lore, like you had the relationships and the stuff, Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes and all the character like Duke's relationship and who he's with and the silly characters from the 80s all being dressed like the village people. But generally, you got that sort of lore. Even though Cobra La was all in there, it felt that very sort of thing. This kind of is a weird one that it feels like it's leaning into sort of the silliness of those Roger Moore films, but also kind of not wanting to explore the lore. Like it wants to be an origin film, but it kind of wants to sort of add depth to a lot of things, and in doing so, becomes I think it really detracts from the potential of it as a franchise. To be perfectly honest, um, it's an odd one. I mean, I I'm trying not to be spoil things to take it, but you can't not. I think to sort of
Yeah,
we're going to spoil everything anyway. But like, I
sure.
mean, like, in order. The thing I talked about in the last episode, I had a cinema. I remember seeing this in the cinema, right? Um, and I saw this when it came out, 2009. And I remember it must have been in Coventry. Yeah, was it? It was in Coventry when I grew up, and that's it. I remember in the cinema with a few people. I can't remember who I was with, but I remember this moment at the end of this film when the Doctor reveals himself to Duke. Um, and it turns out he's like it's Rex. It's the Joseph Gordon-Levitt character, and Duke sort of acts surprised. Someone in the audience just shouts, "You absolute fucking idiot!" And again, that's kind of how I feel because throughout it, I'm like, yeah, is this not obvious to everybody? Like, this is the worst, reveal in a film when you're like, oh, you've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Granted, he's not a megastar or not a big, big star at this point, or he ever really has. But it just felt like this whole setup with like Rex and the everything with the Baroness is awful. Like all of it felt, and I was like, no, this is clearly like it's how is nobody else like like Duke is the dumbest person
Yeah.
in this cast.
No,
And
Duke is
so
a terrible character.
yeah, yeah, but all I can remember from this film is that reveal being incredibly bad, and like you say, getting this visceral reaction from somebody in the audience that was just like, "This is incredibly stupid," and that sort of stuck with me. And a bit like you've said, like has your opinion changed over the years? Mine hasn't either. Like I went to this film thinking it's kind of fun in a silly kind of way, but it is actually the live action version of Team America, World
Yes.
Police.
Yeah, well, it does have that. It does have that problem, and I'm sure we'll get into that. There are certain things in this that you think, how did you make this after Team
Yeah.
America? I mean, the Team America is such a response in part to GI Joe.
Mm.
You have to, be aware of that, and it makes it an international
Yep.
force, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
I like that.
it does certain things right. Um, Obviously movies are being sold to an international audience at this point. Um, but yeah, I mean, the reveal doesn't bother me as much. What I think makes it much worse is that, I mean, to begin with, let's be crystal clear. You have two terrible actors. You have Channing Tatum on one side and Gordon Levitt on the other, right?
Yeah.
Both of whom are appalling in this movie.
Oh, no one, no,
And
no, no, sorry. No one's good in this film. Like Christopher Eccleston, who I actually like as an
oh,
actor,
Eccleston's terrible
is
in this.
dreadful
Yeah.
in this film.
No, this movie makes you think, why did he need to walk away from Doctor Who? Like Doctor Who
Yes.
is like such a more serious role than this. Um, yeah, but what makes that scene worse is that his former friend is right there. His would-be in-law. He's got a mask on and he's bald, but certainly he would have pieced it together by now. And he's just like, "Don't you recognize me?"
Yeah.
And so it's like you have this double reveal, and it's like this could have been handled in a much
Well, do you know
better
what that
way.
made that
But I don't
reveal?
think the reveal really matters.
No, it does for two reasons. It matters because the film wants it to matter, because it's supposed to have an emotional impact, and it doesn't. But the other thing is the way it's played, as you've said, like this film, I don't think knows where it sits on certain things. The reveal that this reminded me of more than anything in this watching. Do you remember Roger Rabbit? Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Of course.
So you know when Christopher Lloyd is he's Judge Doom in that,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
you've had the whole thing about Bob Hoskins' brother having been killed in Toontown, and then when he's
Uh-huh.
revealed to be the Toon, remember me, Eddie, when I killed your brother? Like that's
Yeah.
what this felt like when he's pulling off the wig and the mask. He's going like, do you remember me? And I'm just like, oh, this is so like they are almost like parodying themselves in a film that's been parodied, or like these things have been made jokes of already, and you don't seem to know that. And that's where I was like, it's chucklesome.
Well, I think that this sort of illustrates two key problems with the film. And it's not that it's a terrible movie,
Mm.
but it has two key problems in my mind. One is tone.
Mm-hmm.
That while I like the over the top, underwater battle and stuff like that, um, there are moments that this wants to be a dark, realistic movie.
Yes.
And then there are moments that are clearly just totally over the top. There's dialogue that is, very arch, but then there's moments that you're clearly not supposed to feel that about. And it blends together better than some movies do that have tonal shifts, but it can't really decide where it wants to fall tonally. Um, and then secondly, it feels as if they're trying to pay these homages to the lore and sort of like do a definitive live action G.I. Joe in certain elements. All of the flashbacks with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, like they're
Mm.
trying to honor, that past from the Larry Hama comics. They're doing a much better version of Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow than, frankly, the animated series did, and
Yep.
that we've largely seen before. Okay, that's great. I think both of those actors, are very good here. They are standouts. They're not the best, but I mean, they're quite competent. And then you have other stuff that is just changed for the movie, and that really fails. And the whole Duke, Rex, Baroness plot is dreadful from start to finish. All of
Yes.
that is invented for this movie. Um, I mean, Destro and Baroness having a relationship isn't, but that's invalidated here because she's not this international terrorist. She's been brainwashed. Whereas they have a very rich relationship in the comics and in other versions. Um, and similarly, I feel like it deprives us of the joy of Cobra Commander. Cobra Commander is such a great, fun character. And instead, he's this seething, angry little man until he puts on a mask at the end, and the mask looks like shit.
Yeah.
And, you have this reveal. And, I guess that whole reveal is so we can get the rise of Cobra at the end, except it's already risen. We've already had a whole adventure with them.
No, no,
These are very weird choices to me.
that bit, that ending, right? And I'm gonna because we are gonna jump all over because I think we have to. The film is erratic at its best. That ending, I I sometimes when films sort of catch me and it makes me chuckle, and I'm like, oh, that's not supposed to be funny. This whole moment at the end where he makes McCullen, Christopher Eccleston's McCullen, Destro. And
Mhm.
again, that that accent is like, I finally joined a long line of McCullens, and you're like, all right,
Oh,
cool,
that's the worst line, right? It's
yeah,
like, no, we get it, right? Like, we
yeah,
get it.
you
That's
did.
not what you would be saying in this moment, right?
No, that's it. Like, yeah, the whole, the whole opening prologue told me this. Don't worry, you haven't got
Mhm.
to tell me. And then you have, like you say, the Doctor Rex putting on this mask, and he's like, you shall now call me Commander. And you're like, oh my god, this is it. Like, this is it. They're going to escape, and this is the start of Cobra. Nope. Within 3 minutes, they're arrested. And I'm just like, and I'm laughing out loud and thinking like, this is the most piss poor ending of it. And then it's sort of like in a cage, right? Where he's just sitting there handcuffed. He's like, this is just the beginning. And Kurt Duke's like, and I'll be waiting for you. And you go like, no, no, no. He's in a cage in a submarine Like, there is no beginning. This is stupid. This is an awful
Yeah, that
ending to this film.
is mind-boggling. That I mean,
Yeah.
well, this has dialogue problems to say the least. I mean, that line of, I finally joined the line of McCullough.
Yeah.
It's like placeholder dialogue for like an early draft of the
Dramatic.
script
Yeah,
that's
in brackets, dramatic phrase. Like,
right.
yeah.
Like this is the essence of that scene emotionally, but that needs to be revised. It's not in character. I mean, it's as if he stops and says, "This is the scene where I joined my family's lineage as the man in the iron mask."
Yeah.
Yes, we know that. Why are you commenting on the scene?
Oh,
Um, yeah, and you're right. The sort of capture at the end of this APK. I mean, the end of those, in those X-Men movies where Magneto's captured at the end and is in prison, he's in prison forever, right? We all know he's going to escape, but the characters don't in scene say, "We know you will soon escape and we'll have another adventure with you." Like, what? Yeah,
yeah.
there's a lot of problems like that here.
Yeah. Oh, throughout the film. Like, throughout the film, it is yeah. You're right, the dialogue in this, it can't weirdly the sort of the heart of this film that works best is Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And
Mhm.
as Storm Shadow, as sort of the Snake Eyes is mute, silent throughout this film. And you know, Ray Park was Darth Maul. That was his breakout sort of thing. He's not exactly a major thespian. He's there to
Who
be a
was
stunt.
Toad in wasn't he Toad in
Yes, he was
X-Men?
Toad in
Yeah.
the first X-Men film, yeah. But he's not exactly a sort of, he's not exactly a dramatic actor. He's there as a stunt performer. He's very, very incredibly good at what he does. I won't take that away.
Right.
But I'll give it all to Lee Bong Hyun. You know,
Hmm.
the dude sort of brings a real sort of like emotional level of guilt and resentment to that relationship of like, he's like, he doesn't give up. Like they've clearly crossed paths again. That last battle is really cool. Like I feel like there's a connection between these two, and it's all on Storm Shadow and his performance and how he
Yeah.
sort of like responds to seeing Snake Eyes and that stuff like that. Like that's the best
And
part
he's a
of the film.
proper baddie. Like he's
Oh
still
yeah,
over the top, but he manages to also convey a lot of the emotional sentiment of the movie.
yeah,
And so no, he also seems very competent and not, I mean, he gets a missile off. I love that scene in Paris. He's a
mm,
standout there. He, is really good. Um, but you know that stuff is all working great, but they have to justify, I mean, the whole Duke plot. They have to justify, Channing Tatum as your lead actor. All that stuff is terrible. Why in a movie? I have these problems with like choices made in movies where I often talk about like feeling definitive
mm,
and how like the best thing that the Marvel Cinematic Universe did, I'm definitely a Marvel detractor, but the smartest thing that it did was it felt definitive. Tony Stark was a little different. He was a little more snarky than, Tony Stark in the comics, a little more, confident. And they advanced the timeline to be the go for, but it feels like, oh, this is in line with the comics. This feels like a strong, definitive version. This is not just a take, right? And I feel like, at least with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, they're trying to be a sort of like definitive cinematic version.
mm.
There are a few liberties that are taken, but they're clearly like, Snake Eyes took a vow of silence. They mentioned at the end.
Yes,
Well, you could have mentioned this earlier,
yeah.
and but also in the
Could say
comics,
how could say how as how difficult a vow of silence must be to maintain in a military organization where you sometimes have to have radio communications.
yes, and also since you were a child,
Yeah,
like you haven't spoken since you were like 8.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's a little ridiculous. And of course, in the comics, he was injured with a
yeah,
helicopter. So, he was facially deformed. So, um, that's a little bit of a liberty, but, it's for the sake of space, right? Okay, whatever. So this sort of presents us, is trying to do a definitive version of that story, except It ends with the death, apparently, of Storm Shadow. It runs this story to its conclusion. They've known each other and fought each other lots of times. On the other hand, Destro is just kind of getting started
Mhm.
by the end of the movie. Cobra Commander doesn't exist until the end of the movie. Why do you have Cobra Commander existing after you've resolved the entire Snake
Yeah.
Eye Storm Shadow time? Like, the decisions with the plot are anything but definitive.
Yeah.
And this just feels really odd to me. I mean, yeah, even like the Scarlet stuff is terrible because, Scarlet is fine in this movie, but she's, made as a romantic interest for a different character instead of Snake Eyes.
Not gonna lie though,
Uh
I'm kind of obsessed with Rachel Nichols as Scarlet in this film.
really.
Oh yeah, and I think she's absolutely stunning. And I actually find her. I think she's not. I think she's fine and good as a performance. But no, there's just something. I just think she's stunning in this film. And actually, I think she's a really fun character. Sort of.
Yeah, she's
Um.
she's okay. I have my own confession is that I think that until she's softened, Sienna Miller, despite her past playing, sort of like college girls and stuff like
Mhm.
that, is a great Baroness.
Mm.
She wouldn't be my casting choice, but she's a great Baroness when she's being the badass Baroness.
Yeah.
But of course, she's really got to be a sorority girl,
Yeah.
who's been brainwashed, which is named Anna. This is all terrible.
All
Um,
that familial stuff, all that thing of like the love triangle between, well, not love triangle, but like the connection between her, Duke, and Rex, the Doctor, and Cobra Commander is is dreadful.
yes,
Absolute,
abysmal.
it's the worst
Abysmal from
choices.
start
It's
to finish.
agreed, 100%. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 some of the worst sort of. It's one of those things that would happen in a draft as an option, and someone should then say, "No, we don't need this because that's not what this film is about." You know, this is as you said, this is a James Bond film where we're just going to go on an adventure, and the character arc is internal within the, learn to be part of the Joes or something. Like, fine, have an origin story, but you do not need all that other stuff. I'd rather have Cobra La than this shit.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the it also isn't even thought out on the Cobra side. Like, so
Mm.
Rex is doing this to his sister, right? Like, I'm going to brainwash my sister and give her to an arms dealer
Yeah,
who clearly loves her and is like obsessed with her, but is also mind controlling her. And that is
and then use her,
bad.
as a honey trap for a baron
Yeah,
somewhere.
for a French
Yeah,
scientist who's then killed off. What was the point of having her marry him and infiltrate and stuff? I mean, none of that makes any sense. I mean, she's being passed around and mind
yeah.
controlled and in a way that doesn't even make sense. And if you're going to do that and have that be like some kind of commentary on male sexuality or something, that's fine, but at least there should be some commentary on that. I mean, the closest
It
we get to
doesn't
that
know.
is her
It
being
doesn't.
sad at the end.
No. Look,
It's
look.
confused.
Yeah, I mean he's basically just pimp commander at this point. Like he is just sort of like he has
But
it's
he's pimping his
bizarre.
sister.
Well, exactly. That's
But
what
he's also mad at Duke for
abandoning
not
her. Yeah.
abandoning her, but he then brainwashed her and gave her to this ruthless guy who both loves her and also pimps her out too.
Can we
I
just say
mean,
how bad Duke? This thing about Duke, right? So Duke was involved in an operation where they were in somewhere, and Rex was the scientist. He's the sort of he was in the military, but he was a scientist. He is apparently
the
killed.
implication is it's Mogadishu. So the
Mm.
implication is that this is like behind the scenes of Black Hawk Down.
Fair enough. We'll go with that.
It's bad. No,
Yeah.
I mean
So,
this is
so, so that's happening. Rex is apparently killed. We'll get to Doctor Mindbender and all that sort of stuff. But Duke's response is to he was going to marry this woman. Like he proposed to her, so they have a family and friends that are on this, right? He sort of abandons her because he can't face her. She thinks Rex is dead, so she's in a sort of a grief spiral, right? Rex
well,
then
and to be clear, he abandons her because he promised to protect
yes,
her brother, who's
yes,
a scientist. And then the lab in the middle of Africa where this research was being done in a very dilapidated place that's never explicitly named is then attacked through military incompetence,
Friendly
total
fire.
incompetence.
He's killed with
Yes.
friendly fire. Yeah.
And his response is to stand in the rain at the funeral and never speak to his fiance again.
Right. Here's the bit, right? Because this is supposed to make, this is the whole thing of like, we said, like, the silliness of this, but like, when it's revealed shortly after this, Rex comes back with his face and his kit on. She's obviously still in grief. He kidnaps her, he drugs her and kidnaps her. All right. So she's now going to become the Baroness. 4 years. This should say it's 4 years since that event to the start of this film, right? At no point in those 4 years does anyone get in contact with Ripcord, played by Damon Wayans, or Duke, and say, "Can I? Do you know where Anna's gone? Like, she hasn't come to work. She's not contacted her friends or family. Like, she appears to have gone missing. Well, you were a fiance at one point. The police must have got in contact and been like, you're a suspect in her disappearance. Can we ever talk about this, please?"
None of that happened.
No, it's infuriating how, and then she just appears as a brunette killing people, and she's now a kick-ass military, fighter.
And again, I would not have thought Sienna Miller would play this well. She's on one of the posters for this movie. I have that poster. This is not one of my favorite movies, but I have that poster where, it's stupid that she dual wields, right? Dual wielding is dumb. But,
yeah.
She looks amazing. It's a great fucking poster. And, if she were allowed to play the Baroness as the Baroness instead of like a Valley girl who has nanoprobes in her brain, she could actually have pulled this off and been great.
Oh, when she's a badass bitch. When she's a badass bitch, she's ace. Brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. The problem is, this whole Duke plot. I mean, and Duke, let's be clear, Duke has never been an interesting character in G.I. Joe. Mm-hmm. He's always been, G.I. Joe has the problem of like Hawk and Duke are like higher ups within the G.I. Joe organization. Never been well characterized. They're just basically like goody two shoes. They do their role. Duke kind of sees some action now and then, but like they're not the interesting characters. The interesting characters are all the grunts underneath them. And the interesting characters in Cobra are all the higher ups. Duke is not an interesting character. Why did you make Duke the central character? Well, because you cast Channing Tatum. Mm-hmm. And so now we need a love story. And, you're right. None of this makes sense. Every time, this movie also has the problem of integrating multiple flashbacks. Every time you cut to a flashback, I just groan. I'm just like, please let this be at least let this be a Arashikage, flashback instead of a Duke flashback. Because at least the Snake Eyes flashbacks are serviceable. But no, I mean, I agree. This whole Duke Rex stuff is mind-bendingly stupid. Literally, because Dr. Mindbender is interjected randomly.
Yeah.
Where is he now?
Well, I'm assuming Rex killed him is the only thing I can think of, or some. I don't know. Yeah, it kind of distracts from the plot because it then becomes the point of like, well, the Baroness can't kill Duke and Duke can't kill the Baroness, and so there's this, and then the Rex, then the Doctor or Rex can't kill Duke, and then he's going to have this revenge and all this other stuff, and it becomes so sort of like convoluted, but without being interesting, that it's just sort of like, oh, okay, well, right, we're going to do that. That's fine. That's kind of shit, but that's where they want to go with this. It's such one of those. I can sort of see this. I can see the studio notes or the studio discussion where they're like, someone's going, well, we need this to happen so people can understand what's going on, and this isn't done by fans in that respect. It's kind of, this feels like a studio film, doesn't it? This feels like a franchise starter.
Yeah, and also a little bit of a Channing Tatum vehicle.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And it's clear that like there are people who love G.I. Joe who worked on this. Mm-hmm. And we're like, look, you don't know how bad this would have been if we were not there. The whole Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow stuff is clearly a love letter to the fans. Destro is actually in charge of Mars. He's an arms dealer. Like they get that stuff right, even though the mask stuff is kind of stupid.
Mm.
But at least like that is Destro is basically within lines of where he should be. Cobra Commander is not. I mean, it's like totally a new version of Cobra Commander that devalues him as a character completely. I find that one of the most mind-boggling choices of this movie. But this movie is about Channing Tatum,
Well,
and to the
yeah.
degree that it's bad, and that to the degree that those Joe-loving people were able to sneak that stuff into the script, it's good.
Yeah, just want to say one of the things that's interesting is we say this is a Channing Tatum vehicle. I think it's an interesting one because it's an early stop in his career. Like he's been around for a while, young actor, but this is his first kind of um big role. He was in Step Up and Step Up Two, which are two dance films. I've never seen them, but I know of them. At the same year, he had a film called Fighting, which I believe has also got I know, no, which is quite a serious sort of drama, and that sort of thing. So then he did Public Enemies, which was with Johnny Depp, um, where he plays Pretty Boy Floyd. This is his action. This is
Terrible movie, but
I don't think I've seen it. I think I may have watched it, but never sort of bothered with it. And then the next year he had Dear John. Like this is him trying to find like he's done a whole bunch of things. So he's not quite a name at this. He's one of those sort of pretty boys of Hollywood, and I think he's looking to do a bunch of things. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of time, but it feels
a
like they're
lot
trying
of
to
these
sort of
actors,
present him.
like even Dennis Quaid, is kind of miscast. Like I mean, he's sort of okay in some scenes, but he is just laughably bad in others.
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm constantly boggled by some of these casting decisions and some of these plot decisions. Um, I remember, I mean, going back to the beginning, like, you have this sort of like Destro origin sequence, right? Which is sort of fine for what it is, I mean, at least it's in line with the character, right?
Mhm.
And then you're sort of introduced to G.I. Joe, and they go to the pit, which is now located in Egypt, because
Yeah.
it's an international force. And you see lots of, guys rappelling around and vehicles moving around. And every line of dialogue seems to be G.I. Joe is badass and we're the best at what we do. We're an international organization. Yes, would you like to join us? Possibly. We're the best at what we do. Are you good enough? I don't know. We're the best at what we do. Look, you've got a great headquarters here. Yes, we're the best at what we do. And then they cut to Cobra, and the scene with Cobra is like, here are the Neo Vipers. Yes, they're the best at what they do.
Yeah.
How do you get them to be loyal? Well, we put nano machines in their head. That's why they're the best at what they do. It's like you have these two long introductory sequences of the two teams
those
that
those
are all just about how badass they are.
those vibe. I want to talk about. There's two things I want to sort of mention about it. So this thing you say, yeah, everything's like the Joes being the best at what they do. All right, this is the thing. So when they go to the pit, all right, and they have like you have the General Hawk interview, and they're going down the lift, and it's sort of like they go past like a massive water tank, and there's underwater training, and then there's another one where there's people are doing like hand-to-hand combat, and there's another where they're doing sort of like shooting, and there's all this other stuff. We're an international. So many countries have signed up. G.I. Joe is an international organization. So I like all that stuff, making it international. I think it's interesting as they're going through this sort of mini montage of all the shit they're doing. And it's kind of like, here's the toys you can buy this Christmas. But one of the things that kind of like I'm kind of curious about is that how big is Joe and how good are all these people? All right. So as they're going down this lift, there are four of the men just stood there with guns. They're guarding the lift. How good do you have to be to just guard a lift in a hole in the ground? And also, are these countries literally saying, here's the best that we can offer? We're going to take them off our own national defense military and give them to this international. That sounds arse. That's complete crap. And so there's lots of things like that where I'm like, so you've got hundreds of people in this military Like, so where do you stand in like, I know this is a fantasy film and I know that's the point, but like, yes, we're going to take on Cobra. Cool, cool, cool. What happens? Like, they save Moscow in this
But
film,
Cobra
right?
doesn't exist yet.
No, all right, yeah.
Like, you know, yeah.
This was my
I
question. This is
right.
you're about yeah. My question is like, this is they fight Cobra in this film. What was the point? What was the thing that instigated the creation of GI Joe?
Right.
What is it that they are set up to fight? Because they rescue Moscow at the end of this film. So is it like, oh, there are, Moscow or Russia has invaded the Ukraine. Do we use GI Joe? No. Okay, so there's trouble in the Middle East. Weapons are being like, what is the purpose
Right.
of GI Joe? Because like, all right, so all of a sudden there's a we're deploying troops to this real world conflict in Mogadishu or in the Middle East or like Afghanistan or like wherever it is. Is Joe going to get involved? No. What the fuck does this team? What are they there for? Like, at least when you have like Mission Impossible, the teams of like 6 people, and you go, right, it's 6 people. It's a small unit. It can, it makes kind of sense. They exist outside the system. This is a full army.
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah.
who's
The
paying
version
for
of
it?
this
What's
that
the
goes through
point of
my
it?
mind.
Yeah.
Well, and they keep talking about NATO, like they're working with NATO because
Mm,
NATO's so badass and
mm,
well organized, right? Um,
yeah.
and I'm a defender of NATO, but I mean, come on. The question that I have through this whole thing is there were these, US soldiers who then, joined GI Joe.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, you offer, there was a previous offer to join that they, didn't respond to and, whatnot. And so they're like, right, this sounds good. And then they hang out with G.I. Joe. This whole time I'm thinking, where's the paperwork from the Pentagon releasing them? Because they're AWOL through this whole movie, right? And this is the problem you illustrate of like,
Mm.
how does this coordination with all of these different militaries work?
At one
You've
point,
invested money in these people,
yeah,
training them and, all of that.
none of this
Um,
is cheap. They've got this cutting
no,
edge technology, and I'm going like, why is this not being used elsewhere? And then at one point, like General Hawk says, your heads of state have called you back, and I'm going, well, no, the heads of state have got nothing to do with this. It'd be the head of the army or the military in that country. Like they
yes.
must have a superior officer. This is all garbage. So all that is really bothering me. And I get sometimes hooked up on these little things where I'm like, this makes like no GI Joe fights Cobra. So what instigated the creation of GI Joe? Like I want to know what they were there to fight, especially with all this training and money going into it. Fine. The other thing is those Vipers, as you said. So you have a team of I don't know what there's like what 8 people stood there, right? And one of them puts his arm in, gets bitten by a cobra, and they're like they have these nanobots and they can force out the venom, and you have the growliness of the whole thing. And I'm like, oh my god, these guys are badass. They're like the Terminator. These guys, self healing and all this other shit. This is going to come down to like some badass fight, man on man. Like, are they ever important again in the film?
Well, they're just general soldiers. I mean,
No,
you
no, no,
see
no,
them
no, no.
invade the pit
That's
later
crap.
on.
No,
But I
no,
mean,
no, no. That's
no,
crap. They're not general soldiers. These guys have been shown to be the best of
I
the
know.
best. They're shown to have been
No,
like indestructible. Why is that not? Why is it that like Duke or Ripcord or Heavy Duty isn't like? I need to. There was more of this.
fighting one of them who's depicted as like the Terminator, like you just won't stop. We've shot him 3 times,
Yeah,
like the bullet wounds are. Yeah, I agree with you.
Sergeant
I mean,
Slaughter does more about this kind of thing versus the merciless guy with the wings in the cartoon in the 80s. And that's what they should have been. We're like heavy duties, like there should have been much. There been like these should have been a prototype where there's only like 3 of them, and it should then like heavy duty should end up fighting one of them in some badass fight at the end. It's like a massive brawl. Like this is all such like
set up
unnecessary.
for no
Nothing,
payoff.
nothing.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, so what I would say is like, you're troubled by the international, framework here and,
Mm,
why G.I. Joe was created. I'm troubled by that too, but that's less of a problem for me than like the Neo Vipers. And, you
yeah.
know, I mentioned like this idea of like trying to do a definitive version. This movie has so many ideas in it, and
Mm.
so many of them clearly should have been saved for a sequel.
Yes.
Um, I'm somebody who like I really hate when stuff is in the first movie that should be in a sequel.
Yeah.
And I can kind of accept. Let me give you a couple examples of like things I kind of have accepted. Like it bothers me that the Batwing is destroyed in the first Batman. You
Mhm.
know, like
Mhm.
he's got a jet, it's revealed, and then it's just shot down, right? Like, okay, that's a classic movie. I can kind of accept it. You know, like you need to, uh not destroy the Tumbler or the Batcave in the first movie, right? That's something
Mhm.
you save for another movie, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's the payoff. You need to establish it first. So I'm sort of religious about this. This stuff bothers me. First of all, why are they Neo Vipers? There are no Vipers. The
Yeah.
Vipers are themselves the special missions,
Mm.
more upgraded version of the
Yeah.
Cobra Troopers. Where are the Cobra Troopers? This is like the upgraded version of the upgraded version of the standard model that you haven't introduced the standard model or the upgraded version for. It's as if like we know G.I. Joe history before we've entered this movie, and yet in other ways we don't, and it takes great pains to set up certain things. So the Neo Viper thing doesn't make sense. It sets up these great soldiers, like, the Terminator style, as you say. There's no payoff for that.
Mm.
You have these exosuits. Then you very quickly go to these exosuits, which are I could tolerate in a sequel.
Mhm.
This is something that's like kind of like late stage G.I. Joe. You can kind of bring it earlier and say, this is more advanced technology, whatever. I can deal with that. I need a G.I. Joe movie. I don't need G.I. Joe in exosuits in the first movie, right?
This felt a little bit
And
like
then they disappear. Then they're
yeah.
not important for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Why do we have an exosuit scene? Why do we have a Neo Viper scene? Like, I don't know. This movie has so many ideas like that are kind of like, these are cool ideas. Table that for the sequel. Tell a definitive establishing of G.I. Joe and Cobra movie.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think this is the problem. Like it keeps wanting to do the the big things. And the thing is, I had a look at so this film was directed by I'm going to look at who wrote it as well. But this film was directed by Stephen Sommers, right? Not a massive director. 11 films to his name. The last film he made was Odd Thomas. I've got a weird. No, he's still alive. He obviously produces more things now, but um, and again, I like his film. Before Old Thomas in 2013, this was the film he did. But Stephen Sommers made his name with The Mummy in 1999. And I adore that film, right? Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, Arnie Vosloo, all, weirdly appears in
It's
this
good
film.
fun.
I love that
Yeah.
film. Yeah, classic film for me, right? Perfect balance of like pulpy adventure, sort of, mid-century adventure. Less so with Mummy the Returns, and he also did Van Helsing. And I can sort of see when I look at the Mummy and I go, "Oh, that's a great film. It's really stripped down. I like it. It's a good film." And then when I look at the Mummy Returns and Van Helsing, I'm going, "Oh, okay." Now I can see where he got to with this idea of GI Joe, where like issued this overstuffed selection of ideas. Oh, we can do this, we can do that. Um, and I just think that is when there's so many people involved in this bloody story and script and all this other stuff. I'm not even going to pin down who had what idea, but it definitely feels like a collective idea where there's a bunch of guys around going like, "Oh, this would be cool. Oh, do you remember that GI Joe thing you used to have? Oh, we've got to have the helicarrier in it. Oh, we've got to have this in it. Oh, we've got to have the night ravens and all this other stuff." You're like, cool, that's great. Have those in it. Just do it in a sensible kind of way. What's weirdly about this, right? To say everything you've just said about having, what's going to appear in the sequel.
Mhm.
This film ends with one of the most subtle for this kind of film. Um, what would usually be a post-credit scene, but stinger cliffhanger. The whole thing with like Zartan
Oh yeah.
having his face all molded and stuff, and he's like, I've been studying his mannerisms and you find out that he's actually been Arnold Vosloo again, another sort of actor. I think it's kind of cool. He's been using that technology. The nanobots have made him look like you never see it again. There's
Mhm.
no show. they keep it subtle, right? But and then at the end of the film, you know, the president comes back into the office and he's sort of been, everyone's sort of like, welcomed him back and congratulating on him. He's like, thank you very much. It's so good to be back. Appreciate everything. And then he sits down and starts whistling the song that Zartan was whistling earlier in the film. Like, it's not, it's not,
awesome.
it's brilliant.
It's great.
And I'm
I love that ending.
Yeah.
And the last time you saw the president, he was in his nuclear shelter below the White House, and his one of the guards takes out the other guards, and then a door opens, and implicitly, this is how subtle it is. The guard who takes out the other guards is presumably the missing Neo Viper, right? That's alluded to earlier. And then a door opens. He goes, says, "That's what this is about." And presumably Zartan is on the other side of that door. You never see any of this.
Yeah,
it's just down to him whistling at the desk, where you're like, "Oh shit!" Right?
Yeah,
I love this ending.
Oh no, it's fantastic. That's just what I'm saying about you saying about this tonal stuff. There's this whole section that I'm like, this subplot. I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. I love that. Like, you're not putting too much attention on it. You're just going to give us, you've just got to pick it up and it's there. Brilliant. How is it that you can do that? And then I'm looking at everything else. It's like being told with like a sledgehammer. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like you've got the strength of the Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow stuff. Yeah, some of the flashback stuff is a little heavy-handed and kind of sort of like, cliche.
The young Snake Eyes fighting, yeah. Why are they like 6 or 8? I mean, like, why did they de-age them to little kids? I don't know, but
yeah, it's a bit much.
But I agree that stuff basically works.
It pretty much works. So, I'm liking the performances of Storm Shadow and we'll talk about Snake Eyes in a minute, but then everything else, like everything with Duke and everything else is awful. Ripcord is just, you bring on Marlon Wayans to be funny, like he's the comedy relief kind of thing. But again, for me, he's not working in almost any of it. And then, like you say, like Christopher Eccleston, Christopher Eccleston's a really grumpy son of a bitch, and I never understand why he takes these roles because he's made it explicit. Like I left Doctor Who because I didn't want to be typecast and I didn't want to do long running things. So he signs up to a film that's potentially going to be a franchise to play a major character. Felt like a very odd choice, but he's just like miserable throughout this film, like throughout. Like he has like two. I wouldn't even say like two emotions. Like he barely has one emotion. Like he just sort of grumpy throughout and with a bit of disdain. And then, like you say, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's playing it like Arch and sort of like, I'm going to be the next Darth Vader. Like, it's so weirdly sort of like everything else is so sort of ham-fisted and cartoony that when it's good, like maybe it's not as good as I think it is because everything else is so crap. But I'm like, oh no, this is really strong. I'm really enjoying this part, or this bit subtle and quite informative. But then everything else is utter garbage.
Yeah, what's weird is, it's amazing how much this movie doesn't work considering how it should work. Like, even the Zartan plot with doesn't make sense. Nobody has alluded to that anywhere else in Cobra's master plan.
No.
They literally have targeted Washington, D.C. with a warhead while also replacing the president.
Yeah.
Was that just Zartan's idea then? Or was this, the president says, so that's what this is about, right? Was that really what it's about? Or
it was because
the idea something Zartan did?
So no. So this is the plot. And I got it. The entire point of this film is to get Zartan, to get the president into that bunker because he's going to be alone or with minimal people so they can get the replacement. The only way to get him to do that is to put Washington under threat. And they can't just target Washington, so they have to target other places as well.
Yeah.
So all this plot about the nanobites and all this other stuff is all about getting Zartan in place as the president. That's it.
This could be better explained. Yeah.
Oh, like that's the whole plot. But this whole thing,
I agree.
But
Cobra Commander, I love that part.
Yeah, but the Doctor's not saying this to anybody.
Yes,
like, he's not saying like, right, this is the whole point. This is why I'm doing this.
or
This is
or even something ambiguous like, you haven't seen my master plan yet, you don't know what it's really about, Duke. I mean,
exactly, yeah. You don't know
well,
my real end game, or that kind of thing.
you mentioned like how arch and kind of over the top it is, and it's arch and over the top in places, but it occurs to me that both of the actors playing Destro and Cobra Commander are terrible.
Hmm.
And the funny thing is Destro and Cobra Commander are arch characters
Yeah.
traditionally, right? But they're
Yeah.
never arch in the way that they classically are in the comics or the TV show. Like Cobra Commander is prone to, these great speeches and self-aggrandizement and all of that. That would be so much fun. Let's
Yeah.
watch that. Instead, he's just grumpy all the time and angry. And like you say, Destro is just grumpy and angry. He should be this master scheming, hyper intelligent guy. That's his arch role, is like, the schemer who secretly, has plans within plans and stuff. Where is all of that? So like
Mm.
they're arch, but they're arch in like a one note angry way. Um, you know, and so neither of them are fun, and those are two of the funnest characters in history as far as I'm concerned.
But I think this is one of those things. Like when you look at like the other, let's say Hasbro performances, the Hasbro films, or the films that are trying to do a similar thing. One of the key, let's say Transformers, right? That Transformers from 2007, so a
Hmm.
couple of years before this. One of the key things that that does in that same way is the relationship between Megatron and Starscream.
Hmm.
In that, like, Megatron is he's big and Puffer finally comes in, but there's still that kind of cowardice and everything, and you know but schemingness
Scheming
of
toady kind of, yeah,
exactly of
yeah.
Starscream, and it's all there, yet the characters are still kind of cool. I mean, like, you still see
They've
how
been
cool.
updated, but some
Yeah.
of that original dynamic persists.
Yeah, I mean, like, you get this, you get the cool scene of like Starscream changing in mid, no, transforming in
Mm.
mid-air to attack people as he goes and stuff. Like, he's not useless. He's still
Hmm.
really cool. So you get all that, but there's still Arch, and there's still that sort of, like I said, they've updated it, but it's still there. It's not here. It's like no thought has been gone into this of how they wanted to do this. I go, what's the relationship between Destro and Cobra Commander, or the Doctor, as he's
Right.
going to be called, or like, okay, how is he going to become? Because even the mask at the end of it, like, it's all. This is the funny thing I find with this, right? And again, he does this thing to um Destro. He makes him Destro, which is fine
At the end,
at the end with the
right? He's
metal
been he's
face
been burned in the fight with Duke, and so Cobra Commander injects him with nanomachines that
that turns his
give
face
him a metal
metal.
face.
Yeah, and even the lines don't. The order of the dialogue doesn't make sense, because he sort of says he sort of holds his face, and it goes clonk, and he feels the metal, and he says, I finally joined the line of McCullochs. And then he turns to Doctor and says, "What have you done to me?"
Yes.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you knew what he'd done to you, because you've literally just articulated what he's
You've
done to
just
you.
accepted it and
Yeah,
then decided to respond
yeah.
as if it's new. Yeah.
And as we sort of said, I think in the last episode, I think I like the design of Cobra Commander.
Hmm.
The mask that's just sort of plain, sort of mirrored glass sort of
Face mask.
front.
Yeah.
The face mask, cool. The helmet, it's a great look. Very simple,
Yeah.
very sleek. It looks cool. Like, it's that blank. There's no emotion to it, but you can do all kinds with it. I think it looks really cool. So here they give him some sort of like weird shaped like thing that you can see his eyes through, and then you can do this other bit, but then it covers his face, but has swirls at the bottom like a beard or a octopus or some shit going on. Like, I don't know what
It
it
seems
is,
to
but it's.
be an extension of his breathing apparatus, which is
Mm-hmm.
used after that, explosion. None of that explosion is in the comics or the show or anything
Nope.
previous. This is all new to this. Um, but one key problem with G.I. Joe is that there are lots of characters with these face masks.
Mm-hmm.
So, like traditionally the Cobra the troopers, or at least officers, wear, a face mask. The Vipers kind of have a face mask. Cobra Commander and Destro both have a face mask. Well, you have to
Mm.
differentiate them. Well, one way that you differentiate them is, having Cobra Commander have the helmet over the face mask, right?
Mm.
Here, Cobra Commander's, face mask looks absolute shit. It's hard to even tell in the darkness. It's like, it just looks terrible. Destro's is like this weird, sort of fragmented, faceted gem kind of look that, doesn't look right to me. Um, and so they both look more like each other and are both kind of confusing at the end as opposed to looking cool. So like
Hmm.
even this cool reveal of like he's finally Destro, he's got on the face mask, doesn't look good. Cobra Commander's finally cool, he's got on the face mask, doesn't look good. Why would you put both of these scenes next to each other?
Yeah.
Like, oh, both of your characters have both got the face mask at the same time. Why would you do this? I
Because it's
don't
the
know. This
end.
is
It's because it's the
utterly
end.
mind.
That's the
Right.
only place. The this thing about design, I want to sort of come back to this thing just before we go because it knows it. Go on,
But
finish
think
off.
about how easy it would be to have Destro be in the face mask or Cobra Commander in the face mask, and then the other character winds up looking like him and says, "Oh, okay, well now I'm like you, right? Like
Hmm.
I'm this is my fate now or whatever." There's so many easy ways around
Yes.
this. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, no, it does. It sort of gets to the end, and they're like, "Oh shit, we better put some. We've got two other characters to create before we get to the end of this." Um. So yeah, no, it's ridiculous. The other point is about the designs in this film. I do want to get to the point I want to talk about it because you talked about the face masks, and that the Viper soldiers are kept very simple. It's kind of like a face mask, but it's got you've got the eyes sort of it's shaped enough that you can sort of see it's a face, but it's kind of like a hockey mask and like fine, very plain and simple, not a problem. The other part that then you get people like again like the designs for Storm Shadow are great. Like he wears a
Yeah.
full white suit and all that stuff. Like the dude looks really cool. But then when he's like ready for fighting, like his costume is good. But he looks cool. Everything on the Joe side is awful.
I think Snake Eyes looks pretty good.
Nope,
You don't think so?
nope. I think Snake Eyes
I think
body. I think his body sort of parts look pretty good. I like the fact they've got the. You used to mention there's that symbol on his
the
arm,
Arashikaji
the Irashikaji
Iching
stuff.
thing.
That's
Yeah.
kind of cool. Why does he have a facial expression on his face that's a
I don't know.
mask? That's the bit like is
No,
is
that's annoying. I
is
know what you're
chucklesome
saying.
because it's kind of like
But I
eh?
love the visor,
The
right?
visor's
Which
cool.
was kind of optional, in the old days. But I mean,
Mm,
I dig the visor. Like the visor looks straight out of the comics. So there's stuff like that I can get with the Snake Eye suit.
right. I can
Um,
partly. I'm still not so. I think I genuinely think the one in the next film is better, but
yeah.
it's the sort of those accelerator suits
Oh God.
that are just like they make you faster and da da da. And I'm like, but they're bulky as hell. Like they look awful.
Yeah, let's talk about that because those exosuits, like again, not a bad idea. I mean, this is based on existing technology, is just a couple generations further.
Hmm.
Um, it's the kind of it's pushing the limits, but it's kind of in that James Bond sort of like an extension of reasonable technology sort of thing. It's pushing that a little far, but okay. But then they instantly know how to use them. They're running through
Despite
Paris, overturning cars.
yeah.
They're in the middle. Like cops don't pursue people in high-speed chases anymore,
Mm.
because we're aware that those cause massive civilian casualties. You're more likely to get a civilian killed in a high-speed chase than you are to capture the criminal. Okay, well, we know that now. Why are they running through the streets of Paris, dodging missiles that we're watching blow up cars? This is where the Team America stuff comes in, where it's just like
Yes.
they're just demolishing Paris and nobody says anything about it. Like they don't say this is terrible, like but more people will die if we don't stop Cobra. they just seem happily content to massacre French civilians.
Yes, hundreds of people are killed in their pursuit of those warheads. And like you say, there's this thing of like we've got to stop it. But the thing is, they're stopping the wrong thing because at the end of this section, because they launched the missile, you say Storm Shadow successfully launches the warhead and it hits the Eiffel Tower. Right, two things, two terrible choices are made at this point. Firstly, the Eiffel Tower, so the Eiffel Tower is going to fall over, but the nanobots are also destroying all the metal. Cool, let them finish because what will fall to the ground is nothing. So nobody will be hurt. So actually, Duke stopping it halfway through makes the bad choice. But the other thing is, we then find out that the Baroness has a device that can turn them off.
Right.
So I'm like, cool. So why aren't we going for that as well? Why is it like Duke's going like, right, I'll go for the warheads, Ripcord, you go for the thing. Maybe that's what Snake Eyes is doing. I'm never entirely sure.
They do go for the device, right? And
At the end,
they do deactivate it. But
yeah, but
yeah,
that's
I
the
know
end
what you're
point.
saying.
So like, it's this whole.
It's confused.
No, this whole thing's a mess. And yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
going, okay, I'm not sure what you're trying to achieve. You're destroying property, you're killing people, like people are getting hurt. Like this is a national disaster. So when they get arrested at the end and Ripcord's going sort of like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And the fact that the police don't shoot him on sight, is astounding. Like it's so messy. And I get this is supposed to be an action movie and it's a sci-fi, it's an adventure action movie, but like maybe we've just dated beyond this where I'm like, no, again, because even Transformers addressed this at the end. When you have all the sort of SWAT guys going, right, we're going to go into this city or whatever, nameless city at the end of the first Transformers, but they're like, but we've got to get out. Like, we've got to try and save
Got to take the
civilians.
Allspark out of the city, right?
Yeah, the whole point is get that and move it away from the city. This is like just blow stuff up as we go. Like the whole point.
Yeah, they don't care.
No.
And I have to say that's really distressing to me. I find it. I mean, when you watch Man of Steel and you think that Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is more of a humanitarian depiction of urban warfare than your movie, you might have problems if your movie is featuring people who are supposed to be heroic. And the fact that they make quips through the whole thing just makes it so much worse. I mean, it's like whole families are being massacred on the streets of Paris, and you're making little quips as if you're badass action heroes. And don't, did the writers and the directors, did nobody recognize this problem?
No, they didn't.
It's utterly mind-bending.
I honestly don't think they don't. They absolutely don't. And I think, as you say, the two scenes that tell me this, and also the inconsistency of the crypts. So there's three things I want to mention, right? But the first one is at the end of this, when they've gone through and they've smashed through that train and all this other stuff. And then there's a quip about it, sort of like, they've done all, as you said, done all this stuff. And Duke says, I told you to read the manual. And he's like, there's a manual? Like, and you're like, oh, okay. So you've been given not just expensive, but dangerous hardware, and you've been put people's life and you've not been trained on it. So that's, you're making a joke about it. Like, that's crap. I know it's a little thing.
I just need to point out the irony here is that, we recently watched for Stories Out of Time and Space, the Oblivion, which basically starts with the same quip and tells me right away, I hate this character. Here, at least, it's buried in the middle of an action sequence. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. You've been given deadly military technology that you haven't bothered to read, and we've just seen the deadly consequences of it. That's not funny.
Yeah. The other one, I forget what it was. There's a quip made about Snake Eyes and where he's at, and someone sort of says, oh, I don't really know what he's doing, kind of thing. And you're like, oh, so you're not tracking your team, like, gone rogue. But the other thing that really bothered me in this film and stood out again, they have a French character who is called, and I'm going to sort of just find him because, again, not such a bad character or even a bad performance, to be honest.
Breaker.
Yes, it Breaker, played by
Yes, Breaker. It's an update of Breaker.
yeah,
Saeed Tagmui.
Tag Mao. Yeah, again, not bad performance. Fine, does
Hmm.
but throughout he's so
His main job is to have a French accent.
yes, literally, yeah, yeah.
I
He
mean, that's
might
pretty much his identifying
he might
trait.
as well just be called Frenchie, like in The Boys. Like it's
Hmm.
um um. But one of the things I noticed with his character is like throughout the film, like he's high tech. He's one of the tech guys. He does communications. He's they're literally like ripping images out of a guy's brain at the point of death and all this other stuff, which I hated. Again, like
Hmm.
Torchwood did this, and that's a sort of a science fiction sort of like fantasy show. Fine.
Yeah, I hate this too. Yeah.
The whole point that all this though, right? And maybe I've missed something, but then there's a gag at the end when they're talking about getting into Cobra Commander's base under the ice cap, right? And he says it's like finding a needle in a um I don't know, like a volcano. He says
Something, right?
something, and then Ripcord says no haystack, and he says oh like finding a haystack in a thing,
Yeah.
and I'm like, there's a version of this script somewhere where he has jokes throughout the film where he mispronounces or misquotes famous phrases. His English isn't great.
Hmm.
There was a version of this where him not being good at English was a joke. And that is
Yes.
the only thing that remains of it. And I was like, but it's so out of place because up until now, like he has perfectly communicated in English with
Well,
everybody.
also, let's be clear, he's a communication
Yes.
specialist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I speak French. I've
Hmm.
lived briefly in Paris. It's especially offensive to me to destroy Paris,
Yeah.
be cavalier about mass civilian deaths, not even get the geography of Paris right. I don't know
Hmm.
where these, buildings are supposed to be. Um, but and then to also have your French communication specialist, his defining trait is that he speaks with a heavy accent and doesn't understand
Oh no, they're going to
American
hit.
idioms.
They will hit the tower. They are going to hit the Eiffel Tower. It's ridiculous. Like he's upset when he finds out it's going to be the Eiffel Tower that's the target.
Hmm.
But like more so than if it's sort of like if it was going to be like, oh, he's going to hit the civilians. That's not as terrible. But he's going to hit the Eiffel Tower, so that's even more terrible. Like he doesn't
Yeah, he's like
say,
screaming, "No, no,
yeah,
not the Eiffel Tower."
but it's not like he's saying that's can't be that's a terrible because it's full of tourists and people like
Right.
it's a main sort of center of people. No, it seems to be because it's an iconic representation of Paris. That seems to be the only sort of, it's like it's the heart of Paris. You're like no, it's you need more justification than that. Sorry,
Yeah,
this is
the
ridiculous.
the terrible terrorist attacks in Paris,
Mm,
which were, traumatic and horrific, killed fewer people than G.I. Joe and Cobra have just killed
yeah,
on the streets of Paris.
yeah,
You know, like Charlie Hebdo has nothing compared to this. And you're going like, oh no, the Eiffel Tower, it is iconic. You know, you've got a fucking like electric train going through the middle of Paris.
yeah.
Where did that come from?
I
You
love
know,
that. I actually googled that. I was like, is that a thing? Have I missed that?
no,
No,
not at all.
no, never was, never was. Oh, that case. Yes, I googled the train and the geography of Paris, as you sort of say, but not just Paris. I was sort of on my phone. The other thing I googled, and because not only because I've heard it in this film, I've heard it in other things. Using shadows on a, I'm back. Okay, using shadows on a photograph to pinpoint someone's not just time but
Oh,
location.
yes. Yes, that's quite ridiculous.
Yeah, not a thing either.
No. No,
um,
and that's really good for telling the distance of the sun from the earth.
mm,
It's not really good for determining where on the planet somebody is.
yeah.
No.
So that made me look. I was like, is that possible? I'm sure I've seen that in like a James Bond film or something like. And I was like, no, that's not a thing. It doesn't work. Um, It was all very silly. But again, I was like, okay, comic. It's a comic-y book. It's a funny idea. It works. It does what it needs to do. It gets them to the final location. I'm fine with that. Um, but
But you know, but if you're going to be over the top, be
mm,
over the top. And this is the tone thing, right? It's like go arch with Cobra Commander and Destro, right? I mean, sure, we can have complaints about like what's included, what's not, with the plot. I mean, I have lots of problems there, but at least provide this consistent tone.
hmm
And I feel as if this would be better as just a fun, arch, over the top movie instead of a movie that sort of takes itself deadly seriously, but has all of these arch over the top elements.
Yeah, but I think one of the things I agree. I 100% agree that would be a better sort of approach. But I think again, the thing with this thing with tone and what you're looking for, if you're going to do that and have that balance, you need to be able to have an actor or a performer that can carry that tone. You said about Iron Man being, they lent into it. That becomes the definitive version to of Tony Stark, to the extent of like, if you read the comics now,
Mm-hmm.
you are looking pretty much at, the influence of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you look at, like, say, Johnny Depp playing Jack Sparrow.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that character doesn't exist anywhere else, but like, he was like, no, this is how I'm going to play it. Like, I'm fully leaning into, but I've got a charisma, and the both of them have this idea of like, we have a charisma and a sort of we can carry this character, fine, and that's cool, and that's exactly what you need. The problem with this film is it has no charisma. Like, Channing Tatum is, again, I find this with, like, there are certain actors that can do that. Chris Hemsworth,
Mm-hmm.
whether you like him or not as Thor,
Right.
when he's let off the leash to do certain things, like, he's got a certain charisma. Like, this was the
I
thing that
agree.
this is the certain thing with, like, when Sean Connery was Bond, he had a sort of a twinkle in his eye and a sort of a snarkiness and everything. You knew he was a badass, but like, there was that charisma there. This young Channing Tatum is a charisma vacuum at this
Yes.
point, and the cast around him aren't doing any better. Like, again, I
Yeah,
think Sienna
Marlon
Miller.
Wayans has a little bit of charisma, but but he's kind of annoying, too. But I mean,
Yes,
he's as close as his movie comes.
yes, yeah. But on the villain side, I would say the thing is, whenever you get Sienna Miller and Lee Bong Young,
Hmm.
I'm going to pronounce his name. Yeah, Yi Byung Young. Those two, perfect.
Yeah, they're solid.
But
Until Sienna Miller has to,
yeah, but
play the Valley Girl.
when they're playing
Yeah.
the villains, when they're doing
Yeah.
badass stuff, like when they go to the scientist lab and they're breaking in and they're just strutting in, and then she sort of says, "I need you to weaponize this, otherwise we're going to kill everyone." And then Storm Shadow just shoots someone to prove a point, and it's sort of like,
Yeah.
eh. I'm like, yeah, they have got this nailed. They know
Yeah,
exactly
they're
what it is
great.
they're playing. This is how you do it. This is perfect.
Even in the opening scene where Baroness attacks the military convoy. Yeah, I mean, she's perfect. She's
Mm,
great. She's badass. They land, everything works. Yeah. At least on the villain side.
yeah, and even a
Destro and Cobra Commander are vacuums.
yes, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say that, even I was going to say, even when they're sort of like, they're balanced out, whenever they're sort of with Cobra Commander or the Doctor, I can't call him Cobra Commander because he's not, but like, even when he's with, you got the Rex character and McCullen, like, it just sort of it just kind of falls apart. It kind of like, you go, oh, that's a shame. And every time it goes to the Joes, they're kind of like bland. The time that, do you know what, I know it's a real problem? And this is the question: is Sergeant Stone a character?
I mean, not that I know.
Right. Okay.
That's
Have
just a
him
cameo for Brandon Fraser.
right. Having Brendan Fraser come on and just casually sort of like come on and be kind of like, not cool. He's not amazing. He doesn't steal the show, but he kind of has a way of carrying himself and sort of talking with heavy duty that you're like, oh yeah, you could be quite cool in this film. Like, you've clearly come on to do a day's work, and that's fine. Bit of fun because you know Stephen Summers. But even in that moment, I'm like, yeah, you know, this would have been better with you. I like you in those other things. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's that problem when someone else comes on and you go like, oh shit, you would have been better at this than what we've got. It kind of raises a problem because I'm like, yeah, I don't care what happens to Duke in this film. I really don't. Like, I find
I
him
agree.
boring and,
I want him to be shot in the face. I mean,
yeah.
no, I agree.
Hold
So
hold
Lieutenant Stone
fire
was
for hold
apparently,
fire for the sequel.
oh, I know, right? But you know, so Lieutenant Stone was apparently in G.I. Joe Extreme and Sigma 6, the
Right.
like post, classic eras of just horrible G.I. Joe stuff. Um, yeah, but I agree with you completely. I mean, even Hawk is just there to, Dennis Quaid like should be given something to do. I mean,
Yeah.
Dennis Quaid could play Arch.
Yeah.
Instead, he's just there to bark orders and occasionally say something supportive, and why does anyone listen to him? I mean,
Well,
again, like there's no charisma here. There's no nothing.
in this one, yeah, again, like Dennis Quaid, like, I've seen like Inner Space and Dreamscape and other films, with, from the 80s and 90s, DOA, which I love. Dennis Quaid can do funny. Dennis Quaid can do dramatic. Like, he can have this, but clearly they were like, we need someone with a little bit of gravitas who can growl orders and might be recognized. Oh, Dennis
Yeah.
Quaid's free for 4 weeks.
Yeah, good enough. I mean, he's
Yeah,
got like 8 lines of dialogue in the whole movie.
yeah. But like, yeah, you're right. Like, it's one of those weird ones. You're bringing on Dennis Quaid, and you're not going to have him sort of, give that characteristic big grin and smile. I don't know. It feels again like you go, oh, you've brought them on to not do the things that you expect them to do. Like, it's an
And the
odd
things that
choice.
you expect them to do are the things that would make the movie better,
Yeah, yeah.
that you're deliberately withholding from the audience in order to be a more
Serious.
serious movie.
Mm.
But then you've got all this over the top
Yeah,
stuff. I mean, it's a
yeah.
movie about nanomachines that are brainwashing a girl. I mean, and you're scared to have Dennis Quaid be, crazy ass Dennis Quaid. Like,
Mm.
I don't know. But imagine how good this movie would be if, it committed to put Cobra Commander in a face mask, have him be over the top, have Destro be, more scheming and more range. Imagine if those two functioned at the level that the Baroness and
Yeah.
um, um, Storm Shadow were
Mm.
functioning.
No,
You know,
100%. Like, this would be amazing. Like, it'd be a
yeah,
villain
this would be
movie,
like the
but
coolest fucking movie.
yeah. I think as we talk about these, I think about these toy-based adaptations that we've had over the years, and live action ones. And they've been hit and miss, really. I mean, the earliest one, really, I'd say, is sort of like we had comic or whatever. It's interesting to see where they come from, but like Ninja Turtles 1990, I think is good. I like that film a lot. But at the same time, we had Masters of the Universe with Dolph Lundgren. But even in that film,
We
despite
have to do that one someday.
oh yeah, no, and
Because that is proper sci-fi. They've
it is.
retooled it
Oh
as proper sci-fi.
yeah, I'm a defender of that film. Like, I am a
I am
defender of film.
too.
But the fact is that Frank Langella turns up and goes,
Hmm.
"I'm gonna do everything in this film," and I love him for it. Like, that's where the film like thrives.
And he's
Um,
a good actor. He can do
yeah.
Arch, but
Oh,
he's also done amazing serious stuff,
yeah. No, I've seen him in plenty of things where I think he's great. And so, like, but that's where you look to and you go, right, that's where you do. But even like I say, with Transformers, they did it with Megatron and Starscream. They understood that relationship needed to be there. They added it in. This one doesn't kind of want, I don't know, it doesn't know where it wants to land. And it's kind of ashamed, or I don't know. Is it because it's post?
Well,
Is it post Dark Knight where it's like, oh, we've got to be a bit more serious now because we're not post Dark Knight, sorry, post Batman Begins and Casino Royale. James Bond was 2007. So is it kind of like, oh, we've got to be a bit more
ex
serious?
except this is clearly like, especially in that finale, like in all this over the top elements, this is clearly occupying that Roger Moore space of
Mm.
like, right, the rest of the world has gone Batman Begins. The rest of the world has gone serious James Bond. I mean, there's a room whether it's the Vaughn movies, what are they?
Kingsman.
The Mark Miller, yeah, the Kingsman stuff. I mean, thank you. There's a void there
Mm.
of sort of over the top, action spy, military stuff. This should be occupying that space.
Yeah,
It kind
Kingsman.
of wants to, but it's embarrassed to.
Kingsman did what this film didn't do, and I love Kingsman.
Yeah,
I love that first one in particular. I think is
the first one's
fantastic.
better. Yeah.
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 Um,
But
but you're
I
right.
mean, the second one has some fun over the top,
Mm.
elements. Julianne Moore is fantastic.
Yeah.
Um,
Channing Tatum surprisingly good in the second film for this. More, yeah, no, I just think you're right. You are totally right. I'm not a fan of Roger Moore. I tried to watch I watched a lot of
yeah,
the Bond films recently. I find the Moore ones almost unwatchable, to be perfectly honest. Um,
it's fair.
but no, you're right. There's a space for this, and we do get back to it eventually. Like we get that sort of, as you say, Kingsman, and there's a few other franchises that signed of sort of went, oh no, sod it. Like Expendables even did it. The Expendables was like,
Hmm.
we got a bunch of old guys and we know what we want to do. We're going to blow shit up and have a minimal plot. You go, brilliant, let's do that. And it makes, low budget, made a bunch of money, starts a franchise. Like, why not?
Well, and I think one of the key problems here, so there's the key problem of tone, and I agree with you 100%. Like if that's the space you're going for, go for that space. You cannot hedge your bets.
Mm-mm.
You just have to go for it. But the other thing is this like response to Marvel of like, well, we're going to establish, Transformers and G.I. Joe as, franchises that are popular. Good, I'm all for it. These are two of my favorite, things, in popular culture. But, and I'm glad this movie exists. But, you know, one of the things that Marvel did right was establishing those definitive versions of the characters.
Mm.
So many franchises built in the wake of that, whether it is Universal Monsters or, the Snyderverse, as, you've pointed out, really just went for, oh, yeah, audiences like this. Let's do our version of it. But
Mm.
they didn't do the work of trying to establish that, like definitive version. And over the top, this movie, imagine how good this movie is. Good enough that you imagine how good it could be if it went for that Kingsman tone from start to finish and put Cobra Commander in it from the beginning, and really went for like a definitive G.I. Joe, origin, or for first adventure against Cobra, ends with the same way with Zartan, like this would be just like the funnest, most amazing G.I. Joe movie that would have
Yeah.
spawned a million sequels.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, like, you've got to sort of go, okay, well, that's what others are doing. That's what we're going to do is like, this is our lane and we're going to stick to it and we're going to embrace it. Um, yeah, I mean, the other thing is that, we've said about this mix of things about like resolving Storm Shadow, or he falls into cold water. So,
Well, freezing Arctic water that is
yeah,
actually underneath, like a mile underneath the
yeah.
Arctic ice cap. He's dead.
Wait till the next
I
episode.
know. I know. Yeah.
But, um, but you have that resolution. You have the same thing with some of the other characters. We sort of like you seem to be well along with the Joes are sort of like this established unit for whatever purpose. Yet you're then going to have the origins of Cobra and all this other stuff, right? We did talk about this off air, but one of the things we said about other franchises, especially sort of like the Snyderverse stuff, is the desire to get to the big dramatic punchy shooty as fast as possible. It's like, right, by the third film we're going to kill Superman, or by the second film,
Well,
really,
second film, right?
yeah, we're going to kill Superman, and then we're going to do a bunch of backstory, and then we're going to bring him back for Justice League, because that's what we want to do. And you're like, cool. You do know it took them like 60 years to get to that, or
Yeah.
it's like 50 years to get to that in the comics. So all right, you're going to do it in two films. But by getting to that rushing to things, everything feels rushed and nothing feels cohesive because you want to rush to the ending. That's kind of what this feels. It's like we want to get to all we've got to do. Here's all the cool stuff we want to do now because it's a GI Joe film, but also we want to tell a story of the origins. And it's kind of like, is this a not so much a prequel, but is this an origin movie or is this a an ongoing adventure? And I think this has always been a problem in Hollywood. How do you do an origin film for these things? If look at like X-Men 2000, the
Yeah.
first X-Men film. And I watch that back now, and again, it's sort of like, it's dated, and the film's like, come up to 25 years old. It has dated in different ways. But one of the things that's interesting is they choose a character. Oh, well, Wolverine is our access character, and then we're going to be introduced to the school and all these other bits and pieces. But one of the things that film does well is, again, like it kind of introduces bits and pieces as you go. The relationship between Xavier and Magneto and all this other stuff. But you do struggle with this thing because then you're suddenly going like, well, we're being introduced through the Wolverine character. This is Wolverine's story, really. But we also going to turn up to a school that already has a fighter jet, a bunch of people in costume that turn up and do things. Magneto seems pretty established with the Brotherhood of Mutants, yet we've heard of none of this. Like, no one's ever heard of any of this. This is the first thing. I'm like, but it all seems very well established. There's a school for the gifted, and kids are there. And I don't know. It's the same kind of problem, isn't it? Where you go, like, how far back do you go to create your origin to get to the point you want to get to? And I think that's what this suffers from, isn't it? That thing of like, okay, well, where do we start to create? Well, it's the rise of Cobra, straight into prison. But like, it's not though, is it? Because surely, like, the point should be like the GI Joe should be a response to Cobra.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, there is this sort of thing of like, why is it called the Rise of Cobra? They have nanomachine warheads. They almost destroyed major capitals of the planet. They've replaced the president. They have an undersea base that clearly costs several $billions, right? Both G.I. Joe and Cobra have fleets of vehicles.
Yeah.
Which are kind of cool to watch, but they're clearly very well established. And yeah, I think you're right that this is part of the sort of like got to get to that money shot of the big, sort of thing. But the thing is, so Cobra Commander and Destro kind of get their start at the end of the movie, but you've already kind of wrapped up the Storm Shadow, Snake Eyes plot. I mean, you've wrapped up the Baroness plot. Like, Baroness
off the
table.
Around.
She's
off the table now. Yeah.
I mean, it's like nobody has. It's a version of G.I. Joe. It's a take on G.I. Joe. But nobody has said, okay, so if this is the first movie, we might not get a second. What are the character arcs that need to be in here for each of these characters? Where do we want them to end up to really show the rise of Cobra? I mean, if anything, this is the end of Cobra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cobra has revealed itself and been destroyed. I don't know.
But even you've made a good point actually about how established these things are, and I know I am nitpicking. Fuck it, I am going to start nitpicking because it's ridiculous. But you've had this thing about Duke has never heard of the GI Joes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he has a vague memory because they tried to approach him 4 years ago and he said no. Fine, all right. So they've been around for at least 4 years. That may have been their real starting point. We don't know. But the point that you make, but that's them. So that's them. That's the Joes trying to recruit Duke, right? So they have a recruitment process for the best of the best, all that kind of shit. Cool. So how does Cobra recruit people to become Vipers or Neo Vipers or just general soldiers? How? We've already got McCulloch or McCullen is part of this. He was there. He was the one instructing Dr. Mindbender in the middle of Africa to do his thing. So that was already going on. So Cobra is an extension of Mars technologies. So, is he just using like Black Ops contractors and stuff? Like how, and if that's the case, surely there should be like the military should be aware of this, of like we're getting some real interesting sort of chatter from these, these other elements of whatever. Or someone should be like, there's an awful lot of materials being shipped up to the Antarctic. Like tons and tons of materials being shipped up to the Antarctic and contract. Like, where's all the money come from? Like, is McCullen paying for all this through Mars Industry? And
Yeah,
if he is, like,
we've seen lots of travel to this middle of the Arctic snow cap right here.
yeah,
And all the ships are disappearing.
yeah, and like no, like I'm assuming Mars Industries is sort of like it's not private; it must be public. It's got shareholders, and so like no one's looking at the books and saying like, Mr. McCullen, you seem to be spending an awful lot of money on this project that's not producing any, uh, new
Returns.
contractors are going up. We've got electricians and plumbers and all these people being taken to the Arctic. Like, what's going on up there? Like, I hate. I'm beginning to. Maybe it's because I'm older, and I just think this. It's the Star Wars thing, isn't it? They're saying Clerks, like in Return of the Jedi when they kill off the
Which I thought about as a kid.
yeah the half-built Death Star,
yeah.
and you're like, hang on, there's all people on there. Like, there must be families with these soldiers and all this other stuff. Like, you've killed a bunch of innocents. Yeah, I don't know, but it just feels kind of silly. Where I'm like, this all. I know it's the same thing with James Bond. Like, how's Blofeld got this massive thing inside a lake or inside a mountain or whatever? But that was the 1960s.
Right, exactly.
If we're still doing it in 2019 or 2009, sorry, then I'm kind of like, you do know we've had like all this has had like, bloody Austin Powers has made jokes about this with bloody Doctor Evil. Like, you can't keep doing these things unless you fully lean into it. If it's already been parodied,
go over the top and just
accept
kind of
it.
brush accept that as brush it aside.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, classically, there hasn't been a whole lot. Oh, I guess there has over the years. Different media and comics and stuff. But there traditionally is not a whole lot of description of sort of like forming Cobra, right? But classically, basically, like Cobra Commander is the guy who runs Cobra and founded Cobra, started with nothing, gave these, look, you could play to the incel thing, right? Gave these, men, primarily American men, like a, sense of belonging, a sense of achievement. He teams up with Mars, which provides, the weaponry, and, they're off and running. And this could be a great way of sort of parodying, satirizing the, military industrial complex, all the privatization of, prisons and, black sites and, all of this military technology. You could do that. It's a sort of smaller scale movie. And that's okay, right? And then maybe you can, say, okay, well, this did well. We can do the over the top sequel. But this requires, so you said like you are kind of coming from this and bothered from it from this viewer angle. I'm bothered from it as a writer. And I think if you're going to tell the definitive story, right, you're going to tell, you say, where do I want this plot to end up? Where do I want each of these characters to end up? Let's say that I want them to end up in my classic definitive formation of G.I. Joe versus Cobra, right? So, where do I want to start Destro off? Where do I want to start Cobra Commander off? Where do I want to start the Baroness off? At the end, we're going to have like everything is set up to be G.I. Joe versus Cobra as I deem it, the classic scenario, Okay, nobody's done any of that work here, right? Instead, there's been teams of writers who've come up with the nanomachine plots, which kind of works, but I mean, the Paris plot, the exosuits, A million random ideas are shoved into this. Certain stories are resolved, certain stories are not. Certain characters are just getting started when others are off the board. You're never going to get that definitive version. You're never going to get
This
G.I. Joe
film,
versus Cobra. This is
no,
just a mess.
I think what if I'd been involved in the sort of thing of this, the writing or whatever, because a lot of it still work. Keep the general
Mhm.
plot, right? Just tidy some of the elements up. Like, yeah, drop all the sort of familial stuff. Like, the Baroness is not Anna; she's just the Baroness. None of that needs to be there. It's all silly. None of it works. Like, literally,
Right.
like, make Cobra Commander Cobra Commander. Make her the Baroness. You can have this as the start of Destro. Have it as Christopher Eccleston being the Man in the Mask. Not a problem. Fine with all that shit, right? Fine. Do all that stuff. Focus on the creation of Joe's. This is a unit that's sort of being pulled together, whatever it's going to be. But like you say, don't. But it's almost like when they say about you throw a punch, right, or you're kicking. Okay, you're not aiming to connect with the surface of what you're hitting. You're aiming to be like 3 inches or whatever is behind it, right? So your momentum keeps going. It's kind of what you want to be doing with this. You go, here's the start point, but the end point I want to be at is, like you say, I want this scene to be Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow having their battle on the top of, the Empire State Building or Statue of Liberty or whatever, something really cool, right? I want them to be fighting on top of this. Cool. That's the third, but that's not happening until the third film. That's my plan. I've got this in head. I'm not doing a big plan, but that's the end point, the third film for that one. The end to this film should be, here's all the bits we want to build up to. I'm building to this. I'm building to this. So I want this film to be a success, but also like a teaser for what's coming. Have it as the rise of Cobra, the reveal of Cobra. But the end of this film, when you have Duke turning up with he says like you and whose army, which is a terrible line again. He's like my army, and then all the Joes turn up, right?
I've always been bothered by those scenes in movies where it's like, really, it's because the shot is framed as a close-up of Duke
Yeah,
that you don't see an army of submarines. Like, this is underwater. You can
yeah,
see for miles.
yeah. Um, Also, they have like sonar and stuff on the
Uh-huh.
submarine. So like even like
And that's really important in like all of the preceding scenes.
yeah. Um, I would have had it so that there's a way. I wouldn't have had the whole my army, right? I'd have just left it with Duke and versus Cobra Commander or something like that. And I would have instigated where it was almost like a draw. Like they fought, there's a bit of a sort of an end battle, but Duke's machine gets incapacitated, and Destro and they defeat the plot, right? They defeat Blofeld, but Blofeld escapes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? They defeat Cobra Commander's plot, but he escapes to go off and with Destro now. They've got whatever. So you've established the new Joes, but and they're out there still a threat, right? We can celebrate today, and even have Hawks. I mean, this is the kind of shit you'd have Hawk saying, we can celebrate this victory, but the war is not over. Like this war rages on. Whatever crappy dialogue you want.
Right. It's the equivalent of, Batman on the top of the building,
Exactly, yeah.
Catwoman on the top, where you're like, okay, we set
But this
the
film,
superhero in motion.
but then they've gone off and done their thing, right? So that
Mhm.
Destro and Cobra Commander are out there, and then just as an extra bit, they'll go, oh, but in the White House, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
we've also got Zartan is now the president, and you're going like, oh shit, like the enemy's still out there, and they're now in charge of the government. Like the next film's going to be crazy. So you have like I don't know, Rise of Cobra. I mean, I'd call it the Cobra trilogy. Sort of like Rise of Cobra. I don't know. Well, no, Return of Cobra, just Fall of Cobra, whatever you want to call, whatever you want to do it. But like, have it aim for that bigger piece.
Mhm.
Each film could be an adventure in its own right. You can check in and go like, it's not like a trilogy. It's not part one and part two and part three. But like, you can watch this film and go like, have that sort of like Dr. Claw kind of thing. You've seen Inspector Gadget. Next time, Gadget. Like, have all that kind of villainy at the end of it, but like it needs to keep build introduce new characters in the second one. I don't know. It just seems like mad that they were just like, we want a franchise, but we're only going to do one film, and then we're going to finish all these characters in the first film.
Yeah, that capture at the end is just comes out of nowhere too. It doesn't make sense. Comes out of nowhere.
But it shows that
Um,
Cobra Commander's crap because he just sort of goes, "This is the rise of Cobra," and then he gets arrested 10 minutes later, and you're just like, "That was
uh-huh.
an absolute anticlimax for that." This is the
No, I
beginning.
agree.
No, it's not. This is the silliest ending of any.
But then even the Joes act like it's the beginning as
Yeah,
they lock them into these prisons.
yeah.
So, I'll tell you what I thought, even watching this in theaters, right, at
Mm.
the time, which was that, the first Transformers movie was out. Now, let's see, was the hold on a second. Was the so this was released in
2009.
August
Hmm.
2009. I want to look at the dates of just make sure. Yeah, so June 2009 was Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, okay,
Mm.
which we'll soon be covering on
Hmm.
Stories Out of Time and Space. So the second Transformers movie has just hit theaters. This is like a $1 billion franchise. The GI Joes were the bigger hit in the 80s, right?
Mm.
For the most part. It certainly had more longevity. But clearly are the underdogs, at this point. What I thought at the time was there's an easy solution to this, which is you want to imitate Marvel, right? The reason the Joes exist is because the Transformers showed up in the first Transformers
Mm.
movie. So you needed an international team to fight, to be ready for threats like that. Clearly, like the world has stepped up in terms of its threat level. No nation is going to be able to take them on at a time. Mars is an international arms company that presumably has had defense contracts, access to Megatron's technology from the first movie.
Mm.
That's how they've gotten this technology. And Destro has partnered with Cobra Commander in a scheme to use that technology for, evil purposes. Boom. You've set it all up. It's all set in. You've justified the GI Joes. You get to this cool place at the end of the movie. And what boggled me, just this really upsets me, is not only is this movie a mess. Now the Transformers movies are a mess too, but
Hmm.
this movie is especially a mess. This movie features the pyramids of Egypt,
It's true.
which in Revenge of the Fallen are destroyed,
Yeah,
right, by Devastator.
yeah.
Like this literally uses the same setting, right? The Joes are set up right there. Like how and every Transformers movie uses some kind of like unit, some like invents some like super secret military organization that is set up in response to the Transformers. You have another franchise, right? That is designed to do this and also features outre technology, right?
I mean,
Like,
is this not what they've reached with Beast Wars? Is that not kind of where they got to at the end of the last Transformers film?
I mean, kind of, but that doesn't even seem this smart. Like I mean, it's just like, that's just like, one of the unit random military guys saying, to a jackass, irrelevant, stupid character who should never have existed in one of the worst movies ever made, certainly one of the worst Transformers movies ever made. By the
Hmm.
way, here's the card. I'm G.I. Joe. Well, now where's Hawk? Where's Snake Eyes? Where's all these characters?
And why haven't they been around in the rest of this?
I, I mean, it's mind-boggling how mismanaged this is. But just imagine if this were like you just need a few lines. G.I. Joe's been, you have Snake Eyes be the main character. He's the Wolverine of your, because
Hmm.
there aren't that many interesting G.I. Joe characters. Snake Eyes is wounded terribly, goes, joins G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe has been, created in response to, giant robots trashing an American city. The world has changed and we need an organization capable of dealing with it. Yo, Joe, you know, okay, here's Cobra, keep the basic plot of the movie. Snake Eyes gets an arc. he gets to, hook up with Scarlet by the end of the movie, recover from his injuries, fight Storm Shadow, establish the beginnings of a love interest. Cobra's up and running. Boom, bang, done. Awesome fucking movie.
Yeah.
And in the second movie, you can see them responding to Devastator briefly, like, how was this not done? I don't know. I just look at these movies and think there's a lot that I like, but there's a lot of just missed opportunity.
Yeah. I guarantee that was I guarantee you that was discussed. At some point, there was an executive who said exactly what you have said. Well, why aren't we combining these two? And I think the response will be because we can make more money on two franchises than one.
Yeah. And the little I saw was they thought it would lessen the franchises, right?
Yeah.
To combine them. It's like that's late Universal Monster stuff, right?
Mm.
No, you like Marvel's out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And there's such overlap. I mean, it's like, why create entire other paramilitary organizations that have never existed in Transformers lore to make? I mean, Michael Bay loves the military. Like, you're creating every movie invents a new G.I. Joe team.
I can imagine
just be accessory characters in Transformers movies.
I can just imagine. I mean, the Michael Bay Turtles were horrendous. I mean, they are almost verging on unwatchable. But can you imagine actually saying to like Michael Bay, right, we want to make this as militaristic as possible. Here's the G.I. Joes, like, go at it. Man, that would be insane. Like, yeah, Michael Bay's G.I. Joe would be something to behold. Oh, it'd be a thing.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not saying it's a good thing, but like,
I don't know either. But I mean, at least a strong misreading, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's just such an odd. It's one of those things that, like, I was just looking at some of the reviews of it, as I often do, because I'm curious, and people just like, generally the sort of thing is, this is fun but stupid. What did you expect? And I'm going like, a better film would have been a good start. Coherent plot, characters. I think people just seem sort of kind of accepting that this isn't supposed to be good. Yeah. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It just seems.
But I mean, I think that's true of a lot of these big budget movies. And that's always the excuse. It's like, this is a superhero movie, right? Yeah, but
it's the same with the Fast and the Furious.
Movies,
right? Like the later Fast and the Furious films, like, what do you expect? It's a Fast and the Furious franchise. And you're like, oh, so big explosions, car stunts, but like, everything else is, can be garbage. But that's, as long as it's got that, it's fine. Okay, that's kind of feels pointless then. That's why I sort of found the last couple to be really annoying. Yes. Anyway, we'll bring it to a close. I think we're just bashing this now. We're at a point where it's sort of like, I'm curious to think.
But I mean, there's stuff that works though, right? I mean,
there's
stuff that I mean,
but
it's
that's why it's
correctly.
But that's why it's so disappointing when you do sort of watch bits that you go, well, that bit's really working and it's clearly good, and then everything else is an absolute mess. It's so weird. Anyway, we'll be interesting because next week, or say next episode, we they try to do a soft reboot, course correction. I don't know how. I'm interested to see what the conversations were and the law, but we introduce an actor. I'm using that term loosely. That was considered at the time the franchise saver, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and
Bruce Willis.
Not
to be, look, they finally got some.
And wasn't it Andrea Padalecki as well? So who I know from like the Orville and several other things, Wonder Woman at one point. Yeah,
they finally got some interesting actors to play Joes, in the sequel. And I will say the sequel is more fondly regarded than the first one. I think this is pretty widely seen as uneven, to say the best.
Yeah, I've only seen the sequel once. And so it's been several years, so I'm kind of looking forward to seeing it and seeing.
I recommend it.
Is it better? Is it is it more fun? Is it like better made? What is it? Because all I recall is all the talk about it was this is a course correction.
Mm-hmm.
Not a massive one, but like a course correction. And you go, all right, cool. Let's see what that course correction means. Like, how does that work?
Yeah. It does have some of my favorite sequences of all
Yeah,
G.I. Joe stuff. Um, but yeah, we'll see.
cool. I think, yeah, we're interested to see how it goes. But anyway, no, I mean, this has been at least a thing. We're getting through the sort of the GI Joe franchise. Got two left to go. And yeah, I think, weirdly, I'm kind of looking forward most to Snake Eyes, um,
Ooh.
which will, again,
Have you seen it?
once and again, like when it first came out.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember some of the fighting in it being quite good, but I don't remember anything else about it, to be perfectly honest. So,
And you won't after you watch it
we
again.
should, yeah, I should take that. I've seen it once. I often remember films. The fact I can't remember anything about it is probably not a good sign, to be honest.
No, I had the same response. Yeah, I've seen it exactly once. I mean, I'm a JoJo fan. I have only bothered to see that movie once. Um, whereas I've seen JoJo Retaliation probably like 10 times.
Okay, well, that's a
You know,
better sign.
yeah. JoJo Retaliation is more of the leaning into the fun.
Okay,
It's a mess of a movie, but at least it's leaning into the fun. It knows what it is in the way that this did not.
I have
Snake
two.
Eyes is Batman Begins. It is hyper serious. It's not bad, but it's just kind of like
Yeah,
you did this.
the two things. Yes,
Congratulations.
the only things I remember from Retaliation, as is going to next week, is Cobra Commander has the full costume. And I remember thinking it was kind of cool then when I saw it, and it has The Rock and Bruce Willis in. That's about as far as my memory goes.
Yeah, I
So,
remember. The president plot comes back from this
mm,
one and is the heart of the movie. Um,
excellent. In that case,
that
then,
that actor who plays the president like steals every scene he's in. He is like I want him to. He needed to be like box office gold. He needed to
well,
be in everything.
Jonathan Price has been a Bond villain. Like he
Mm,
was a Bond villain for The World Is Not Enough. I can't remember which one. Tomorrow Never Dies, maybe. One of the Pierce Brosnan ones, anyway. And he was
Brosnan
quite
one,
good in
yeah.
that. So
No,
yeah,
he's amazing. I mean, he steals the show. He's so much fun. Uh, yeah.
excellent. All right, I look forward to that then. Anyway, for now though, Julian, thank you very much for.
Thank you. Thanks for talking G.I. Joe.
No, I'm
They
loving it.
do
It's
get to
good
say
fun.
Yo Joe once. And I do have
Heavy
to
Duty
say,
says it, doesn't it? Heavy Duty says Yo Joe. Yeah.
I do have to say, even though I hate it, I hate the Avengers Assemble kind of like calls and stuff, a little part of my heart does swell as he says that. It makes no sense. I don't know why he says it in the context of the movie, but I do feel a little swelling in my heart.
Yeah. Um, I was glad they said it because I was like, it seems like it's important. It needs to happen. Um, okay. Anyway, no, but ladies and gentlemen, just a sign this is a joint production between 20th Century Geek and Stories Out of Time and Space, and we are doing this as a sort of thing. We're realigning an awful lot of stuff. And on the other podcast, what we're doing with Stories Out of Time and Space is we're sort of all the Patreon stuff that we've done over an awful long time is now going to reach the main feed. We've kept it as exclusive for an awful long time, and now it's going onto the main feed, and it's going to be on there on Stories at Time and Space, and that includes a whole bunch of extra apocalypse movie stuff, like bonus stuff we did about other films and other TV bits and pieces. The rest of the Twilight Zone is going to be intermittent in there as well. So go check that out. But on the Patreon, we're still doing stuff. I'm still doing sort of like 30-minute thoughts when I get a chance, other bits and pieces. And we're also we're going to be exclusive. We're going to be ahead. It's going to be sort of starting with, we are going to be recording very soon. We're going to be recording about RoboCop, and then we're going to go into the next season and doing a whole bunch of other stuff. But that will be exclusive
Season
to Patreon.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, we're calling it Redux. It's going to be season 6 Redux because it's going to be us going back to a whole bunch of things we haven't gone back to. Like we're going to do some more stuff. We're going to Star Trek 3. We're going to do, I can't remember,
Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi. Yeah. Going back.
I'm going to force you to watch Sucker Punch.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be a good conversation. I'm open to that.
Yeah.
I'm open to that.
Yeah, I'm interested.
And so, yeah, we're going back to sort of like, franchises and directors and bits and pieces that we're going to sort of return to, and then we'll carry on. But that's going to be exclusive to Patreon for at least, I think at the moment, like 6 to 9 months, because there's going to be
I think
so
it's going
much
to be
that comes-
longer.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And we often stick to our plans, and there's obviously times when we go, oh, we want to talk about that. So there's other films
Yeah.
coming up that we might jump onto the main feed for. We shall see. But for now, go check out the Patreon. The link is down below. It's on Patreon. Just search for 20th Century Geek. For $5, you get access to all kinds of bits and pieces. It's been a real hell of a ride. There's some great content on there. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I
thank you
really
very
appreciate
much.
it.
It's been great. I'm enjoying it. And ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you on the next episode.